The illusion of the self. Hopefully, we've been through the litmus test, the thought exercises, and have explored where we would expect to find the central self. Also, I hope you're getting a handle on how you must interrogate the first-person experience. I feel we need to take a break from exercises, and let's go over a conceptual framework for the statement that there's an illusion of a self at the center of experience. Furthermore, if there isn't a self to be found, then what exactly is going on? Again, I don't have an Eastern religious or Eastern tradition background, and I remember that when I first encountered this, I was quite confused on a lot of the analogies I heard being explained. For that reason, I wanted to take a break from the exercises and provide a conceptual framework that hopefully works better for contemporary audiences. For me, although the analogy I'm going to present is in no way perfect, I still wanted to present a description that more closely approximates my experience of the non-dual flow state. We'll get to that in the next lesson. So, put your earbuds in, put your phone away, and you can either listen while sitting on the couch or while going for a walk. Let's start by trying to get an understanding of what it even means for there to be an illusion of a central subject in our experience. How could something so real to us not be there? I want to compare a different illusion that I think we can all agree was very common and very ingrained. I don't want to offend any contemporary audience, so let's focus our attention on Greek mythology. I'm clearly not a historian, but I think you will get the gist of what I'm getting at here. Let me ask you this. Were Greek gods real? Did they and do they exist? I think that almost unanimously, we would all agree that they did not and do not exist in reality. We would not expect to find Zeus throwing lightning bolts through the sky during our next thunderstorm, right? Let me ask you this though, was Zeus real to the ancient Greeks? I think we can all agree that Zeus was as real to most Greeks as the sun rising in the east. There was no doubt in their minds that there was a God intervening in the world. How can something that we know now to be completely made up be so socially acceptable, and even more important for this lesson, so real to our ancestors? Let's explore how that complete illusion could create such a firm, kind of transparent overlay on someone's daily experience. If you could transport yourself back 2,000 plus years ago and explore Greek culture, it would be apparent that individuals believed that there were gods interceding and affecting daily life. There were gods that families would pray to when soldiers went to battle, gods to pray to for rain during a drought, gods to pray to when desiring to have children, etc. As we evaluate this from a contemporary standpoint, we clearly know that this overlay was actually only a thought, a belief, that was an additional framing of people's experience, not factually based in reality. Stated slightly differently, although a real and socially acceptable thought, it was and is a false claim. We know that characters such as Zeus were not actually participating in the lives of the citizens. However, if you were to go back to those times and tell an average citizen that a god like Zeus was an illusion, imagined, a thought, most would discard that claim. They might say, of course there are gods, everyone believes that, or I prayed for rain, and it rained a few days later, or we prayed for a victory on the battlefield, and we won. It was such an ingrained belief that its realness was on par with that of seeing their family, friends, etc. Similarly, that's how to get a base understanding of where we are going, inspecting the so-called illusion of the self. Don't get me wrong, the feeling of a self is a real thing. Trust me, I thought it was there too. A central subject on the receiving end of everything looked at. But that's the whole story, actually. It's only a thought, approximating a location that would be best described behind where we take our eyes to be. It is a very widespread illusion and belief in Western society today. If I were to go and ask anyone if they have the sense that there is a center of their experience, they would say, "Of course there is. Who else is making my decisions?" or similar claims. It is such a strongly held belief that even the act of inspecting whether it is an illusion would be considered an unworthy use of time and effort, which I totally understand. This is equivalent to asking a similar interrogation from the Greeks, asking them to look for whether they could find Zeus in addition to thunder and lightning. If you were able to find the exercises about thoughts in any way interesting and surprising, and now understand where we will start looking for the self, then I would suggest that you might be ready to really start inspecting whether you can find the center of your conscious experience. I'm not going to claim that you will eradicate the sense of the self. You've heard the saying, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Well, this is more like 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. The belief and thought of a self will continually reappear, which is fine. Similar to a Greek that went on a similar journey and found no evidence of their gods, even despite continued lack of evidence, the belief will creep back in. Furthermore, I would argue that a goal of total eradication of a central self would actually be unhelpful and not desirable in Western society. My current sense is that the intuition of a self is actually beneficial in framing your goals, plans, social structure, and desires to excel. But there are a couple comments to make here. First of all, for those of you that, when asked to look for yourself, or turn attention on itself, or look for the looker, repeatedly get hung up on that instruction, saying, "I don't know what to do with that." No worries. The irony of that situation is that the reason you get hung up is that there's nothing to find. Finding a thought is an impossible task, and that's why you start thinking, my legs? My nose? Pressure in my head? I've also heard the concern that wouldn't finding no center to consciousness result in a feeling of depersonalization? Or it sounds odd that this would be a positive revelation. What good is there in going down that path of inspection? I understand those questions, and I get the hesitancy. If this is a real concern, no worries. Let this be a point where you say that you're not interested in inspecting any further. Some Greeks, if given the choice, would not want to discover that Zeus was fictional, and that might be best for some people. I get it. I can't speak for anyone else, but I have personally found my experience to proceed differently. When there's an added layer of thought of a central experiencer, there is an unfortunate tendency of being centrally contracted and focused on thoughts, as that central self. Thoughts of a thinker, thinking about thoughts in relation to a thought of a self. That's exhausting. There's a huge personal and interpersonal expense associated with that narrative. An excessive amount of time each day is spent ruminating on thoughts as they appear. My experience is that there's also an associated physiologic expense that those thoughts provoke: stress, anxiety, anger, sadness, etc. The collateral damage of time spent engaged in a continuous cycle of getting wrapped around thoughts affects not only my life, but the ones around me. When I'm lost in thoughts of an internal dialogue, I contract around those thoughts. I contract as a husband, a father, a friend, etc. Here's what I've personally found after looking and not finding a central subject to the conscious experience. First, just by performing the exercise over and over, even with repeated discovery of an absence of the central subject, that exercise is not sufficient in and of itself to achieve non-dual flow state. However, repeatedly recognizing its absence is a necessary step to proceed. Just like the analogy with Greek mythology, once the belief is dispelled in Zeus, there isn't all of a sudden an understanding of the actual physical universe. Further education is necessary. But continued shrinking around the illusion and narrative will inhibit a progression and curiosity to see what is actually happening. In our case of inspection of the self and not finding it, I find that if you are equipped with the ability to really inspect the claim, confidently directing attention to inspect the location where it should be found. This is not your nose, your chest, pressure in your head, and in no way has anything to do with what you see when you look at your knees. The immediate preceding moment of experience will be a recognition that there is just the visual field. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So, I wanted to give you a framework for how to have an open mind to inquire. Again, stop here if you think this is not a journey you want to go on, but if you decide to look further, hopefully we can take the steps necessary to discover how to experience the moment free of the added baggage of essential self. Prior to our next first-person exercise, I wanted to include a conceptual framework for the concepts of selflessness and emptiness, and provide a framing more approximating my experience. And I think it will be worth your time.